The original picture I took was one of several. I think we probably have, maybe even 20 or 30 photos from different times that we went to that place. And it's just this spot that it's kind of where we first really started getting to know each other, I suppose. And it was a kind of a pinprick of calm in the chaos of London. And Sophie and I used to go there to, we'd take a little hip flask full of whiskey, and she'd baked some home-baked brownies. Back then we used to smoke little rolly cigarettes as well. And this place, it was maybe only 5 minutes from where we lived. So after work, we just used to sit there as the sun was setting and talk about our day. It's kind of just right next to the Thames, and it's in front of a collection of houseboats, this really kind of alternative, quirky houseboat community. And you can see Tower Bridge in the distance, and we used to people watch, and we'd watch these very alternative people cycling back and kind of clambering into their forested tree houses. And we would climb over there's a kind of a small wall about shoulder high, and you can climb over and you can clamber down, so you're kind of protected from any people walking past, and you can just look out at the Thames and look across at the London skyline, and it's a really kind of perfect hidden spot. I think we just got back from a trip away to Morocco. The photo that we chose, I think Sophie was in a particularly playful mood, and we were just really messing around. I mean, it's kind of a selfie. I think we were both in really high spirits. We just had a great time away, and it was good to be back in London, back home. Sophie was working at St George's as an F1 doctor, and so when she got back from work, we'd kind of she'd either bring some food, and we just go there before kind of winding down for the evening, and it was just a nice I guess a bookend to the day, really. I've just been back the once since losing Sophie. I went back with her brother Adam, who we also lived with at the time in Bermondsey, so he knew the spot as well. And yeah, we just spent kind of, I guess, half an hour there kind of reminiscing some stories that we both had of Sophie, and we took some whiskey as well that we kind of drank as a bit of a ritual. Yeah, and I think that it's somewhere that I'd like to come back to kind of over and over again over the years, really, just as one of those places that feels like it's kind of imbued with a sense of Sophie, and kind of with her playful essence. And yeah, I at least I hope to. I'd like to come back more, particularly in kind of the weeks following losing Sophie. The first time that you go back to any of these places, it really hits you really viscerally. I remember I was actually on the train up to the station to go to that place, and even just walking through the train station in Brighton, I just found myself kind of in tears, really, in a very public place. And it's just, I think it's not necessarily a quality of sadness, but just a real tenderness and a kind of intensity of emotion. So the first time that we met, she kind of bounded into this house just down the road in Bermondsey, where her brother Adam was living, and she was carrying a sack of concrete and a couple of wooden posts, and she was just on a mission to erect this hammock in the back garden. And that, I think that just kind of summed up the type of person that she was. She was so full of energy and this luminous, charismatic presence who kind of charmed everyone that she was in contact with. And she also had this remarkable capacity for empathy and to be there for her friends, as I kind of found out in the years to come, who were often going through very hard times themselves, and even if she was going through quite a rough patch, she'd always go out of her way to be there for her friends and family too. And yeah, she was just, as I wrote in the post, I felt like she showed me what it meant to be vulnerable, which I think as guys we tend to find quite hard, and she kind of showed me what it meant to love, and that was kind of the gift that she gave me. Yeah, she was just an incredible human being, and she was diagnosed with bipolar in her 20s as well, and she went through quite a few tough times herself as well. But even when she was going through moments of anxiety, she always make time to be there for her friends or for me, or sending kind of crafty gifts and cards and home-baked goods to people. Yeah, she was amazing. First of all, I think that depression, and in particular bipolar, is really poorly understood by the majority of the population, and even even doctors. I think, and even people at the forefront of the field don't really fully understand exactly what causes it or exactly how to treat it, and it presents itself differently for different people. And for Sophie, I think she initially struggled a lot with the diagnosis of bipolar, and the fact that it meant that she was meant to take medication daily for it, and also being a doctor, it can affect your job opportunities to some extent, and it's kind of on your record. And although most of her friends and certainly family and me didn't ever judge her for it, I think that in the community more widely, certainly being seen as someone with bipolar has this stigma attached to it. So I think in the beginning she certainly found it quite hard. And in terms of how it affected her, I think it's really at least my interpretation of it was, there were these kind of biochemical reactions that sometimes happened, or these triggers. So certain things like having particularly stressful shifts at work, or doing nights, or doing long shifts, or if something happens, or even simple things like not exercising or not getting enough sleep can be really, really powerful triggers. And for Sophie, initially in the first few years when we were seeing, or the first 2 years when we were seeing each other, she'd just go through lows, and I guess just kind of be, I guess, depressed for days at a time. And then later on she started getting kind of more anxious about certain things as well, which for me was really hard. And I think for for anyone who's caring for someone who loves someone who goes through these struggles, it's really hard to know what to do in those times, because you feel completely helpless when someone's in that place. And I think initially I wanted to try and, again, this is maybe a typically male response, but I wanted to try and fix things and try and be useful and try and make it better. But I think over time I just learnt to try and hold space for her, and try and just to be there for her, and remind her that she was loved, and that this was just like a bad storm that was coming, and at some point soon she'd feel good again. And she often did. I mean, she often it was only less than a day or so, and then the next day she'd be like jumping out of bed, and she used to cycle 13 miles to Worthing Hospital each way, so 26 miles a day cycling. And when we were living in Bermondsey, she loved this idea of micro adventures, and she suggested we went out to Greenwich Park to sleep there overnight, and then wake up at like 5 a.m. with the sunrise, and then she'd cycle off to work. So just like this real kind of adventurous spirit that was kind of punctuated with these more intense low periods. In terms of the chemical imbalance part, I think it's I mean, one of my doctor friends made the analogy of mental health challenges being almost equated to physical health, but we just don't see them that way. So if if someone has a broken leg, then it's completely normal to give them crutches, but it's different with when it's not so visible. And something that I noticed or experienced very viscerally was how Sophie's mood could suddenly go from being completely herself to, she'd often kind of catastrophize certain things, or she did this thing she called it compare and despair. And again, it could just be a trigger, and what I would imagine be a series of chemicals that just get released in your brain. It kind of hijacks your rational prefrontal cortex, and she just wasn't herself when she was in those states. So it felt to me very much like her brain was hijacked. And in terms of the kind of the conclusions that she came to, I think when she was in that state of anxiety, she believed two things, really. I think she believed that she was being a burden to myself and to her family when she was like that. And when she was in this state of anxiety, she felt like it was never going to get better, and she didn't see that it was going to improve. And so the tragic and false conclusion that she came to was that it would be better for everyone else if she took her own life. And because she was this very stubborn and very, very driven person, she carried it out before anyone else could intervene. So yeah. It's really hard because on the one hand you can't know exactly how the other person is feeling. You can only go on the things that they're saying and the things that they're doing. And I mean, for me, I could only really offer kind of love and support and say that. And she herself would, she'd remember these things like the day after, and she'd be like, oh, that's ridiculous. And she'd see how warped that perspective was herself in the days afterwards. It's just when you're in that moment, I think, because of, again, the way that our brain and minds get hijacked, it's impossible to see things clearly. So it's almost like these lenses that you view everything through, and even your memories as well. So when she was in this state, she found it really hard to think back and remember, all the positive and happy memories and experiences that she had, and the times when she did get better. Yeah, I think it's really just like a lens that kind of shuts down any sense of possibility or curiosity or excitement or things getting better in the future. And that's really what makes it such a devastating condition and illness. Almost inevitably, following suicide, there is always going to be, and at least this was my experience, was questions of what if and guilt. And I'd been away I was in Portugal at the time. Sophie had been with me literally the day before, and we'd gone climbing together in Portugal, and she'd flown back to start work on the Monday, and she'd been to a gig the night before and had a great time, and sent me a message. And it felt like it was this perfect storm of variables where if one of these small things hadn't been the case, this wouldn't have happened, and she would still be here. And so there was a lot of just questioning and feelings of guilt, which even at the time, if I didn't feel like they were necessarily rational, they still come up. And I can imagine why that stops a lot of people from talking about it, because it's not only very painful, but there's a lot of there certainly can be a lot of shame associated with it. But I think what I've come to, or at least what I'm thinking at the moment, is whenever something is in the dark like that, I think it can kind of fester. And if you're able to talk about things and to shine a light on them and to be curious about them, I think they tend to lose their grip on you. And certainly if there's other people out there who've lost someone to suicide and they're still going through these kind of quite dark emotions and feelings of anger, both at the external world and inwardly, I think it's important to try and eventually have the courage to kind of look at them and at least talk about them if you can. I think it really comes in waves, and it comes in, at least my experience was that it comes in stages. Initially, that was, obviously losing Sophie in the absence of her physical presence. I felt really guilty about making any plans or thinking about the future which didn't involve her, because we kind of crafted this idea of how the next few years were going to look like. Like, we had plans to maybe move to Bristol or maybe do some travelling and all these things, and somehow making plans of my own felt like a betrayal of our relationship to some extent. So that was really hard initially, and also even kind of feeling it, like laughing or kind of finding things funny or feeling excited about certain things, again kind of came initially kind of tinged with this feeling of guilt, and why am I not like sad all the time, and I should be mourning and grieving and all these things. Yeah, and I also felt like I'd met other people who had 5-10 years after losing someone close to them, they were still very angry, and they had a lot of unprocessed grief and trauma. And so I kind of, and I knew that I had maybe a tendency to not feel my emotions as much as maybe it's being British as well. I think partly it's kind of in our DNA, unfortunately. So I ended up doing a Vipassana, which is like a 10-day meditation retreat. It's like a silent retreat. That was also incredibly hard and challenging, but also I think it gave me some of the solitude and the space to allow myself to kind of surrender to some of these feelings. Again, I think, lots of people say when you lose someone, just you're being really strong, like stay strong. And to me, it was almost the opposite. It was like, you need to learn how to not tense up and like surrender into the like obliterating pain and let it completely break you. That experience for me, it kind of towards the end of the Vipassana, once you're, for me anyway, once I allowed myself to kind of feel it, it kind of turns a little bit, and it became more a sense of tenderness. I guess I felt connected to Sophie as well, and I've spent the last 6 months really revisiting the places and the people that I felt most connected with her. So her close friends in Colchester and Bristol, and this spot in Bermondsey, a place that's really special near to Colchester where we went away together, and also down in Brighton as well. We were really lucky, and we both love to travel. So any holiday that Sophie got from being an F1 doctor, we kind of jumped on to try and go places. We initially kind of had our first trip together to Morocco, and we returned there twice in the years following. And this place in Tagazout, it means a lot to me, and I took her surfing, and just, I think it's kind of one of the places where we really, really fell in love. And, getting lost in the streets of Marrakesh, and she wrote a story about these misadventures, as she called them, that we had. And being sick in the bus on the way back to Marrakesh, just like lots of lovely things. But lovely, right? We also did quite a bit of exploring in England. We borrowed a good friend's camper van and drove down to Cornwall, as I mentioned earlier, a couple of times, and had a really, really lovely time exploring the countryside down there. Sophie's sister also got married off the coast of Scotland in Mull, so we kind of went up there too. We went to Bali last year, which was really lovely. I did a yoga training out there, and we spent kind of 3 really amazing weeks just kind of learning so Sophie learned to dive out there as well, and her dive instructor said that she was the only person he'd ever seen who was so excited to be underwater that she did somersaults.
Just as a matter of course.
Yeah, she was just like a little kid underwater, and she really loved nature, I think, and so we would just try and find places that we could kind of be out in nature. I certainly feel lucky to some extent, and I think that we were able to kind of cram in, like, in some ways, like a lifetime worth of experiences into those 3 years. So I think for that I'm definitely grateful. I think that talking about death in our culture and our society is so rare, and it's really unusual to have honest conversations about death generally, and certainly about losing people that are close to you. I think that something that it gives you, we're all intellectually, we all know that at some point we're going to die, and those close to us are going to die, but it really doesn't hit home emotionally on a visceral level until you kind of go through something like this, or at least it didn't for me. And I think that along with obviously the shittiness of that process and how devastating it is, that there's also an awareness of how not only how short our lives are, but also kind of what matters at the end of it all as well. And I mean, thinking to Sophie's memorial, you're really touched with how, whilst these achievements and things that you might do they feel so important at the time, what really matters and what the kind of stories that people share at the end are the stories of how generous you've been, and the times that you showed kindness, and the things that you loved. Like, that's the stuff that matters. And I feel like we're so disconnected from that in day-to-day life, and just this awareness of the impermanence of everything really around us. And I think that having it just gives you a sense of clarity, and I think it makes a lot of things which would normally piss you off or normally like trigger you to be angry, it just doesn't matter. And I think that kind of perspective is something that I'd like to hold on to. And I think that the more people that can talk about death, and not have it be this kind of taboo part of our culture, I just think that's only going to be a good thing. So So at some point during that retreat and in the weeks afterwards, it feels like, you've been broken open, and I think that from that state you feel much more aware of everything. That can sometimes be overwhelming. It can be a double-edged sword, but I feel like I'm almost kind of rebuilding the foundations of who I am at the moment, and trying to make decisions from that place of feeling open and feeling connected. And yeah, I mean, without a doubt, it's changed me. And some of the conversations that I've had with other people who've lost people close to them have been really, really, or felt really profound. I think I don't know what the future's going to hold, but I know that I'll always carry Sophie's kind of spirit and energy with me, and I want to try and spend as much time in nature, which is kind of where I feel closest to her, and kind of live in a way that hopefully would make her proud if she was here to see it.